Alright my friends, let me show you how this character one-shots enemies with no chance of missing or failing, while also being completely invincible to almost all enemy damage. We're going to start by casting Hexblade's Curse on the Oathbreaker Knight, our designated punching bag for this scenario, and then walk up to him. I quick saved and cut there because I've been trying to record this and the Oathbreaker Knight has rolled 7 2s in a row. I'm not making that up. So let's see if he hits this attack when we deliberately provoke an attack of opportunity. Okay. One more try. Okay, this time for sure. So, we provoke an attack, and the Oathbreaker Knight finally lands a hit. We take a grand total of 2 damage on our temporary hit points, and the Oathbreaker Knight, from the Oathbreaker Knight's Divine Smite, and the Oathbreaker Knight takes in return 80 damage back. This is doubled. The cold damage is doubled because of the wet condition. That's not necessary at all, but we're showing off, so might as well do that. And then, since we want the Oathbreaker Knight dead, we're going to go ahead and cast a 6th level magic missile, select him with all 9 of the missiles, and just watch the combat log have a heart attack. The Oathbreaker Knight, of course, lies dead and is overkilled by about, I would say, about 250 damage in that spot. Probably a little more, even. So, as you can see, take no damage, kill enemies in one click. Let's get to the build. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to another Baldur's Gate 3 character building guide. Hope you're all doing well. So let me ask you this. What's better than deleting enemies in a single click without any chance of failure? And what's better than being completely invincible to enemy damage? Obviously, the answer to that is both of those things at once. Today, we're going to be combining 2 of the most powerful builds in the entire game into a single, even more powerful build, capable of deleting enemies simply by willing them out of existence. You just click on them and they're gone without ever having to roll a die. And if something does go wrong, then you can take literally thousands of damage before ever being at risk of death. We're going to be building the magic missile Abjuration Wizard. This build is one of the most powerful available in the current game, and I will say that it is so strong that it will unbalance the game. So if you're looking for the most balanced experience, I don't recommend this character, but if you simply want the power fantasy of playing an invincible wizard who vanishes enemies with a thought, this is the character for you. Before I begin, I do want to take a quick moment to say thank you so much to Zachary Hankins for the $10 donation, Tarantula for the $10, Thomas Beam for the $20, Sevnir for the $20, and Pat1 for becoming a channel member. Thank you so much, my friends. I really appreciate the support. It really means a lot to me. Alright, let's break Baldur's Gate. We're using Gale here as the example character because, of course, this is a wizard build and he's the wizard of the party. Some might even say this is the most wizardly of wizard builds, and I really like it for Gale because it gives him the skills to back up his ego. If you're building this as a custom character, then what race you pick almost entirely doesn't matter. The character is so powerful that the racial bonuses are a very small percentage of the overall power budget of the character, so you can build it on pretty much any race and it will be excellent, and we get all the weapon and armor proficiencies that we need from our class levels anyways. If you really want to squeeze out that extra bit of optimization, then the best pick is going to be Gnome. We're going to be almost completely invincible to damage-based attacks from enemies, so Gnome giving you advantage on mental saving throws can stop one of the very, very few ways that you can still lose combats on this character by making it harder for enemies to land debilitating mental effects on you. Other great picks include the normal standouts, of course, Halfling for even more safety by rerolling 1s, Dwergar for out-of-combat invisibility so you can kill enemies before they even know that you're there, Wood Elf for Half-Wood Elf for bonus movement speed, and if you lean into the darkness aspects of this character, because we do get good access to the ability to abuse darkness if we want to, then Drow, Half-Drow, or Asmodeus Tiefling can get an extra cast of darkness, making that an even more powerful strategy. Now, you might be wondering why we didn't do this build earlier. It seems like a natural pairing. But the answer is that until patch 8, it wasn't really possible, because with the launch of patch 8, both of these builds got a tremendous additional tool in the form of, as with so many other builds, Hexblade Warlock. This lets us hit the breakpoints for killing enemies in one shot with Magic Missile, thanks to Hexblade's Curse, while also giving us Armor of Agathys. So it gives us all of the tools that we need to make the Abjuration Wizard work, and all of the tools that we need to make the Magic Missile Wizard work in a single class level. So we're going to start with a level of Hexblade Warlock. Since we're going to be primarily a wizard, we're not going to take any offensive spells from Hexblade Warlock. We're going to use it for defensive and utility spells. But the most important things that it gives us are Hexblade's Curse, which let us add our proficiency bonus to damage every time we damage an enemy. Since we're using magic missiles, we're going to be doing tons and tons of damage instances to enemies. You can see that in my magic missile build guide. And so this Hexblade's Curse damage is going to apply over and over and over again in every single cast of Magic Missile. The critical hit bonus doesn't matter because Magic Missile can't crit, but it will still massively improve our burst damage, and thanks to being a Warlock, this gets us Armor of Agathys without needing to invest in a Sorcerer level, which Abjuration Wizard used to need to do, so now we can get both of these things at once. So for our cantrip selection, we're going to go ahead and take Blade Ward. This is an incredible tool for an Abjuration Wizard. When you have flat damage reduction, multiplicative damage reduction, like Blade Ward, is incredibly powerful because it effectively doubles the efficiency of that flat damage reduction. So it's going to make you survive many, many more times than twice as long because you're multiplying all of your damage reduction in addition to multiplying your health whenever you have damage resistance from Blade Ward. We're also going to go ahead and take Booming Blade. I know I said I wasn't going to take offensive cantrips, but this doesn't use our actual stats. And Booming Blade is a lot of damage. This character is going to be in melee a lot of the time because we're an Abjuration Wizard, so we're going to run up to enemies and get close to them. Being able to hit them with a weapon with Booming Blade, and later we'll get Shadow Blade, makes us actually an extremely credible melee threat in addition to all of the casting and blowing up of enemies that we're capable of doing. So this character can attack on many, many different angles thanks to all of these abilities. We're also, of course, going to take Armor of Agathys. This is an Abjuration spell, so it lets us build Arcane Ward. I'll talk about that a bit more in a second. And with all of our damage reduction, we're going to multiply the time that this lasts by many times over. And if you cast this with a high-level spell slot, you're going to be able to do thousands of return damage to enemies, because they'll never be able to break it. Every time they hit you, they're going to take 30 cold damage, and that adds up really, really fast. Or 60, of course, if they're wet. In addition to that, we're going to go ahead and take Hex. It's only available to Warlocks. Wizards can't get it, and they can get Shield, which is the other spell we're interested in. While most of our while Magic Missile doesn't use attack rules, so doesn't benefit from Hex, we have a lot of other abilities that do use attack rules, other cantrips, and just hitting with our weapons. So Hex is a pretty big damage source, and something that we can use in some combats. For our ability score selection, although we are a Warlock, we're not going to take Charisma because all of our offensive capability is going to come from our Wizard levels, so we're going to use Intelligence for that instead. So we're going to take 16 in Dexterity to max out our Initiative and Armor class in the early game, and then 16 in Intelligence to max out our Wizard spellcasting, as well as 12 in Wisdom and 14 in Constitution. This character is also powerful enough that if you want it to be your party face, you can take some points away from these other stats, especially if you plan to use stat items or events to increase your attributes later on, and put them in Charisma and then take some dialogue skills. And you can definitely have this character act as your party face. For this demo, I'm not going to do that, and instead I'm going to focus on maximizing our combat power, but I did want to mention that that's an option if you prefer to have this character with high Charisma. We're just going to go ahead and take, let's say, Investigation and Nature, because our skills really don't matter. This character is not intended to be in dialogue very frequently, and we just want our stats to give us the highest possible power level in terms of our combat capabilities. All right, that's it for level 1. Let's go on to level 2. At character level 2, we're going to be immediately leaving Warlock and taking levels of Wizard. For our cantrip selection, we're going to go ahead and take Ray of Frost. This is the best damage cantrip and gives us something excellent to do every turn. Enemies are going to be wet a lot because we do a lot of cold and lightning damage for this character, so we want to be throwing water bottles or getting enemies wet really frequently, so Ray of Frost will often be doing double damage, and it's just the best combat cantrip available for wizards. Also works well with Hex, which increases the damage dealt when you Hex an enemy and then hit them with Ray of Frost. We're also going to take Minor Illusion to group enemies up. This also lets us collect them together so our Phalar carrier can hit more of them at once with the aura, letting our magic missiles pop enemies more easily. And finally, Mage Hand. Since we want to get enemies wet, because this build does tons of cold and lightning damage, dropping a bottle of water on the ground and then having the Mage Hand throw it at an enemy is a way to do that without actually spending a turn. If you don't like microing Mage Hand, then you can just take Firebolt, because being able to light fires is also pretty useful in some scenarios, but this is the most mechanically optimal set of cantrips. For our spell selection, there's a few that obviously we need to make certain that we get. Magic Missile is, of course, the most important one. This is a Magic Missile build, so we need to have Magic Missile so that we can cast it. We also need Shield. Shield is the best defensive spell in the game. In the early game, before we're invincible to enemy damage with Abjuration stacks, Shield is going to be invaluable for keeping us alive. Although this is an Abjuration spell, it unfortunately, at time of recording, doesn't stack Arcane Ward, because it works as a reaction and is coded sort of weirdly. But other than that, it's still an amazing spell, so we definitely want it. Chromatic Orb is another great combat spell, and then after that we can take utility spells like Enhanced Leap and Longstrider, and something like Fog Cloud, which can blind enemies with no saving throw. At level 3, we're taking our second wizard level, which of course lets us pick our wizard subclass, which is going to be Abjuration. Abjuration Wizard gives you Arcane Ward. Now, the tooltip here doesn't tell you what this actually does, because this is Baldur's Gate, so why would it? But how this ability works is whenever you cast an Abjuration spell, you gain a number of Arcane Ward stacks equal to the level of the spell. So if you cast, say, Armor of Agathis, you get 1 Arcane Ward stack. This can go up to double your wizard level, and when an enemy hits you, it reduces the incoming damage by that amount, and then you lose 1 stack. You don't lose that amount of stacks, you just lose 1. What this means is that as soon as you get a few levels and get these stacks to a reasonable number, enemy damage is going to be reduced to 0, and you're only going to lose 1 stack at a time, which you can quickly replace by casting more Abjuration spells in combat, assuming that enemies survive your missile barrages from your magic missiles. For our spell selection here, of course we're a wizard, so we're going to be able to learn all of the scrolls that we find. So what you decide to pick as you level up is going to depend a lot on what scrolls you've managed to find access to. But important spells to have include Grease, which is just a really nice control spell, and Find Familiar, which gives you a lot of out-of-combat options. At character level 4, we're taking our third wizard level, which it's taken me 4 takes to say because I kept saying liver level. So, treasure that image. Which of course gets us second level spells. There aren't that many second level spells that are extremely important to this character. We can stack Arcane Ward using upcasted level 1 spells, so you can just cast a level 2 Armor of Agathis in order to stack your Arcane Ward, but there's definitely some spells that are extremely worth mentioning. Obviously, Cloud of Daggers is an incredible spell just in general, just the best combat spell at this level, and still extremely useful in the early game. Darkness is also very powerful for this character if we take a second level of Warlock, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a second, because this character can abuse Darkness if you take 2 Warlock levels. Another spell that's really worth mentioning for this character is Shadowblade. Although we do have 2 weapons that we want to make extensive use of, Shadowblade nevertheless increases our damage output significantly if we're actually making weapon attacks, and this character can of course do that. You can spend a high-level spell slot, a 5th-level spell slot, on Shadowblade, and just wade into melee, dishing out incredible damage using the Shadowblade Resonant Stone combo, and also being invincible to enemy attacks, so if you want to take fights where you're not spending spell slots, having a Shadowblade as an option is a great choice for this character. So not only do we get to do the magic missile stuff, with Shadowblade and Booming Blade, our melee damage output is actually incredible as well. Obviously, what spells we take here are mostly going to depend on what scrolls we find, but these two are particularly worth mentioning. At character level 4, we get to take our first feat, and our feat is going to be Dual Wielder. There are two weapons at most stages in the game that are incredibly powerful for this character. In Act 1, you get the Spellsparkler, which charges up your magic missiles with lightning charges, allowing them to do significantly more damage every single shot, and also stacks with your additional damage that you're getting from Hexblade's Curse and other damage riders that we're going to be stacking. In addition to that, you want to use Phalar Aluve. Either you can carry this, and in the early game that's often going to be what you're doing, and then you can have extra damage from that, or you can have an ally carry it, and you can use a Shadow Blade, or a shield, or another offhand weapon. So Dual Wielder gives you a lot of different options. Typically, you're going to be using a Shadow Blade and a Spellsparkler with an ally carrying Phalar in the early game. And then in the late game, we get Markoheshkir, and we're going to transition to Spellsparkler plus Markoheshkir for the maximum amount of damage. For our cantrip selection here, we're going to take any utility cantrip that you might want. Firebolt is still very useful, as is Bone Chill for Act 2. Being able to turn off enemy healing is very helpful for this character. Or you can take something like Light, which is often very useful. Friends, if you are a party face. There's a lot of different options here, and of course some of these you could find as scrolls, so that may affect your decision. I'm going to take Bone Chill because it's always useful to have, especially as we get into Act 2. For our spell selection at this level, I already talked about a few of the spells that we might want, but obviously your decisions are going to be governed mostly by what scrolls you have. And for your prepared spells, just ignore these higher level prepared spells. They're ones that Gale has learned in this playthrough, but not ones that we've learned in this for this character yet. For your prepared spells, you're mostly looking at something like Magic Missile plus Shield, as well as Chromatic Orb as your level 1 spells, and then at level 2, you're going to take Shadow Blade, Misty Step, and Cloud of Daggers, and then you can grab another utility or combat spell, whatever your party might prefer. Something like Enhanced Leap is obviously incredibly useful, and as a ritual spell, Hold Person combines extremely well with Shadow Blade because those automatic critical hits can be a tremendous amount of damage with this very high damage weapon in the early game. So a lot of different options for how you prepare your spell list, but these 6 spells are going to be your go-to combat options. At character level 6, we get Wizard level 5 and get 3rd level spells, which gives us access to 2 more extremely important spells, plus a bunch of other powerful spells that we can find from scrolls. But the 2 most important spells for this character are Counterspell. Not only is this the best defensive reaction in the game and just an incredible spell that every party wants access to, it's also a level 3 Abjuration spell. So whenever you counter a spell, you're going to refresh your Arcane Ward by 3 points, which, given that often you'll have taken a little bit of chip damage in these fights to your ward, if not necessarily to your hit points, this is a great way to replenish it. Another incredible way to replenish it is another awesome combat spell, Glyph of Warding. This gives you 6 possible choices for the glyph, each of which is incredibly powerful in combat, and the cold damage glyph, given that we're doing a lot of wet and cold effects anyways, is also going to be extremely high damage, but also it's another non-concentration abjuration spell that you can cast in combat to refresh your Arcane Ward. So these 2 spells are going to be your typical way of refreshing Arcane Ward in combat and making sure that you retain your invincibility. At character level 7, we actually have a pretty interesting decision to make for this character. With 5 Abjuration Wizard abilities, we've reached a pretty good breakpoint because we have 10 stacks of Arcane Ward, which is at the point at which it becomes really difficult for enemies to kill you. Imagine an enemy with 3 20 damage attacks, which is a pretty strong enemy for this point in the game. If we cast Blade Ward and walk up to that enemy, their first attack does 0 damage, their second attack is going to do 20 halved down to 10, and then we'll subtract 9 for 1 damage, and then their third attack will do 2 damage. So they'll have hit us for 60 damage, we'll have taken 3, and then we'll have returned 45 damage with our Armor of Agathis, or if they're wet, we'll have returned 60 damage in return. So of the 60 damage that they tried to do, they'll take all of it, and we will take 3 of it. So this is a pretty powerful breakpoint for the character, so we could, at this point, take a 2nd level of Warlock. This gets us a couple pretty powerful things. The first of these is, obviously, as a warlock, with Devil's Sight, you get darkness, and that is an incredibly strong ability. And if you're doing a darkness-themed character, it's ludicrously powerful. If you're building your party to center around darkness. And the second is that it gets you a trick to infinitely stack your arcane ward outside of combat using the Armor of Shadows evocation. Armor of Shadows lets you cast Mage Armor without spending a spell slot, and while normally you can't cast Mage Armor if you already have it, so this lets you cast a spell for free, but then you can only do it once, Mage Armor also cancels if you put on any piece of armor. So you can cast this invocation, put on a piece of armor, take that armor off, and recast it to stack your arcane ward up to maximum for free without spending spell slots. This is pretty powerful, if maybe a little bit cheesy, but obviously the quality of life from being able to stack this and not having to spend spell slots on other stuff is immense. Whether you take the second warlock level is going to depend a little bit on how much you long rest in your games. If you long rest a little more frequently so you can recover these spell slots more, you don't need the second warlock level at all. If you long rest very infrequently, you might want it. Overall, I think it's a little more powerful to keep leveling in Wizard, so for this demo, I'm going to keep doing that. But the second level of Warlock is extremely strong for the infinite arcane ward stacking, and I'm mentioning it here because this is the most likely breakpoint to take it. With our 6th Wizard level, we're of course going to get 2 more spells. What spells you pick here is going to depend pretty heavily on what scrolls you've found up to this point in the game, but Sleet Storm's a great control spell. This character will never lose concentration on haste because you're never going to take real damage, so it can be very helpful to have that as well to enable your party members, so those are some options. Your prepared spell list at this level is going to look very similar to what it was before, but is now going to involve these 3rd level spells, Counterspell and Glyph of Warding, as well as it redid all my prepared spells, of course, because it often does that, as well as these lower level spells in terms of Magic Missile and Shield and Chromatic Orb, and then you can mix in other control spells, or like Sleet Storm or burst damage spells like Lightning Bolt, if you want those. At level 8, we get 4th level wizard spells, as well as 14 stacks of Arcane Ward. And the 4th level spells, there's a few pretty powerful tools that we get here, but one that's worth mentioning specifically for this character is Fire Shield. It's an evocation spell, so it doesn't stack your ward, but what it does do, which is a little weird because it seems like it should be Abjuration, but what it does do is give you resistance to 2 more very common damage types, and resistance is incredible for this character because damage multipliers work so well with flat damage reduction, and even more retaliation damage when enemies hit you, so the Armor of Agathys damage and the Fire Shield damage can stack for even more damage output. Ice Storm is also a really nice non-concentration spell that deals cold damage, so that's pretty useful. And Wall of Fire can solve entire encounters on its own, so those are the most important level 4 spells to take a look at. At character level 9, we get to take our 8th Wizard level and get our 2nd feat. But the funny thing for this character is that in some ways we don't really need it. Most characters are desperate for feats, and can never get enough, but this character, in a lot of ways, doesn't really need any of the benefits of feats because we're already just so strong. Alert is always an amazing option, but this character doesn't need to go first as badly as other characters because enemies can't kill you, so you can just go second. And an ASI to increase our intelligence does make us much better at landing our wizard control spells, increases the damage and accuracy of our cantrips and stuff, but a lot of our damaging effects don't use our intelligence either. Magic Missile never cares about our intelligence, Armor of Agathys never cares about our intelligence, any attacks we make with Shadow Blade will use dexterity rather than intelligence, so we don't need this as much as other wizards. It's still probably the best choice to just take 2 points in an ASI, but there's actually a lot of more fun feat options that this character can get away with, so I want to talk about those a little as well. 2 points in dexterity is also a great option, especially if you're using a lot of Shadow Blade attacks at this point in the game. Some other really fun options that this character gets include Heavily Armored. Heavy armor proficiency is actually kind of useful. There's some heavy armor sets that we definitely wouldn't mind wearing because some of them come with a lot of damage reduction, and the Armor of Persistence gives us permanent blade ward, makes us even harder to kill, of course. Stuff like mobile can be very useful just to move around and get next to enemies more often. And another really fun one is Sentinel. Enemies will often try to ignore this character completely because they know they can't damage you. So they will try to go after your allies and just not attack this character. If you're playing solo, they will often just pass turns entirely. Sentinel keeps them stuck in melee with you, so prevents them from running off after your allies if you're making weapon attacks. So there's a few different options that work really well for more fun feats, though the best overall is probably just to boost our intelligence. We're still a wizard, so we still want to land those control spells. For our spell selection at this level, again, you can just pick up any utility spells or spells that you think you might need. Another one worth mentioning, by the way, Protection from Energy gives you damage resistances, which again are very, very good. But here, of course, you're just playing Pokemon and catching up on any spells you haven't found yet. At character level 10, we're taking our 9th wizard level, going to 18 stacks of Arcane Ward, and getting 5th level spells. For 5th level spells, I'm going to suggest Conjure Elemental. This character won't usually want to use high-level spell slots on summons, but it's still a really nice boost to have, especially if you get a lot of spell slot resets, or you're using effects that can reset your spell slots in kind of a cheesy way as well. You can get an extra summon, and the summons are still very, very powerful. The Water Myrmidon is less powerful for this character than it used to be because it no longer makes everything wet, but still a great option. Cone of Cold is also excellent, and Hold Monster is still a great spell as well. Cone of Cold is good for this character because we're, again, doing a lot of cold and lightning damage, so wet effects. This can give us an AoE damage effect to complement our single target damage. At character level 10, we get improved Abjuration, which stacks our Arcane Ward to our Wizard level every time we short rest, so saves us a lot of spell slots over the course of a day. This is part of why I think you don't usually need the infinite stacking from Warlock, although again, that's a very powerful option for players who long rest very infrequently. And of course, we get to take a cantrip, so we're going to take True Strike to annoy people in the YouTube comments, and some more spells based on whatever you haven't found up to this point. And finally, at Wizard level 11, you get 6th level spells, and the fact that Warlock doesn't give you 6th level spell slots unless you take 11 Wizard levels is again part of why I tend to prefer the 1-11 split, even despite the bug with the infinite Arcane Ward stacking. You can also respec to this once you're level 11 and get the short rest stacking if you find it annoying to spend spell slots to stack Arcane Ward. So you can do the split with 2 levels of Warlock and then finalize on this level at level 10 or at level 11 or 12 as well. We get some amazing spells from 6th level. Now, most of the time, our 6th level spell slots are going to go to casting magic missiles or casting Armor of Agathis, but we still can benefit tremendously from Globe of Invulnerability, which lets us be invincible if any fight threatens to overcome our massive damage reduction. Then we can just overcome that here. And another incredible AoE damage spell, Wall of Ice, which you can cast and then immediately cancel to get the initial damage and the damage over time both at once, so effectively quadrupling the damage of this spell with wet and blowing up entire encounters immediately. Alright, my friends, that's the Abjuration Magic Missile Wizard, but of course the way to make this character as powerful as it is involves items, so let's talk about those. For items for this character, we have 2 main goals. We want to increase the damage of our magic missiles, and we want to become tankier, so we want to blow up enemies in one shot, and we want to survive infinite amounts of damage coming towards us, so our items are all going to go towards those goals. This character has a few specific item requirements, and I will say, in general, if this character is in conflict with another build for a specific item, you should prioritize this character's access to that item over almost any other build. We need a lot of these items, and we make better use of them than most other characters. We don't need them all, and you can certainly build this with fewer of these items. It will be just fine. An Abjuration Wizard is still incredibly powerful, and a Magic Missile Wizard is still incredibly powerful, but these items do go a really long way on this character. For the first kind of item, there are 3 specific weapons that we need to keep an eye out for. The Spellsparkler, available in Act 1, and Phalar Aluve, available in Act 1, and Markoheshkir from Act 3. The Spellsparkler gives us lightning charges whenever we deal spell damage to an enemy, and Magic Missile deals multiple instances of damage with every cast, so we get 2 lightning charges for each missile that we fire, and especially on lower difficulties than Honor Mode, we will often get even more than just 2 per missile, because other damage instances will often trigger these lightning charges as well. Phalar Aluve, using its Shriek ability, so Phalar Aluve Melody, Shriek allows every enemy in the area, or forces every enemy in the area, to take an extra d4 of thunder damage every damage instance that they take. Since we're dealing lightning damage, and magic missile damage, and Hexblade's curse damage, these will all independently trigger this extra thunder damage, so the damage instances stack over and over and over again with Phalar Aluve for massive damage output. You can either have this character wield it, we do have dual wielder, or you can have an ally carry it. In Act 3, we get Markoheshkir, which, when set with Koreska's favor to the lightning version of Markoheshkir, has a very similar effect with the Spellsparkler, where it will give us extra lightning charges, going up to 4 per missile. So we're going to be stacking tons of lightning charges, triggering the extra d8 of damage 4 out of 5 missiles, and actually in practice even more than that, and getting an extra damage on every attack. This is way more damage, by the way, than I see Rhapsody mentioned a few times, because that's plus 3 damage per missile. But the extra lightning charges from Markoheshkir add up to way more, because they also trigger other damage riders. So the best endgame setup is the Spellsparkler and Markoheshkir. In addition to that, we want the Psychic Spark. This gives us an extra magic missile whenever we cast magic missile. So with a 6th level magic missile, we're going to cast 9 missiles with the Psychic Spark. And of course, it doubles the effectiveness of increases the effectiveness of level 1 missiles by 33%, which is a huge bonus. And then just gives you an extra spell level on every missile thereafter. And Hat of the Sharp Caster, which lets you re-roll a 1 or a 2 on damage dice. This isn't a huge damage increase, but magic missiles do roll a d4 of damage every time. Re-rolling a 1 or a 2 increases our average damage significantly. Technically, this is a bug because it's supposed to only work on spell attacks, which are spells that roll to hit. That's what an attack is, and Magic Missile doesn't do that. But it's such a minor bug that I think Hat of the Sharp Caster is totally fair game for this character and increases your damage output immensely. We also want even more damage riders, and one of the best ways to do that is the Callous Glow Ring, which adds 2 extra radiant damage to basically every type of damage we do, including all this lightning damage and thunder damage that we're doing. Anyways, since we're doing radiant and thunder damage, we can add in the Coruscation Ring and the Luminous Armor to add a bunch of radiating orbs off of that radiant damage and off of our spell damage, which will then allow us to apply conditions to enemies to trigger the Boots of Stormy Clamor and the Gloves of Belligerent Skies to stack Reverberation. When we get 5 stacks of Reverberation, that's another d4 of thunder damage for yet another damage instance. So all of these items stack together to massively increase your damage output per missile by stacking even more damage instances on top of those. In addition to those options, we have a bunch of other powerful items or alternatives if we want to be tankier. Firstly, increases to initiative are always good, so things like the Hellrider Longbow or Elixirs of Vigilance are incredibly powerful for this character. We don't really need our bow, so this just gives us +3 to initiative for free. We also can benefit from swapping out our boots for the Boots of Striding if we want to be tankier for specific combats. We're often going to be concentrating on spells, and prone is one of the only ways we can lose concentration, so immunity to prone is very good. This character has medium armor proficiency, so we can use these. Another way to increase our damage output also is the Boots of Arcane Bolstering, plus using effects like haste or speed potions. If we spend 1 action on dashing, that gives us Arcane Charge, which gives us a +2 to our damage with spells against threatened enemies. The tooltip here is wrong. It says when we're threatened, but it's actually when the enemy is threatened. So if you move into melee range with that enemy, which you will, or if an ally is in melee range with that enemy, you get +2 bonus damage. So that's another way to increase our damage, especially if you have another character that's using the Boots of Stormy Clamor for whatever reason. There's also a ton of other armor options. The Luminous Armor isn't necessary, and it does require you to be very close to the enemy to trigger these radiating shockwaves. So there's a bunch of other options that are very powerful as well. The Bone Spike Garb or the Adamantine Scale Mail both come with flat damage reduction, which basically gives you extra levels in Arcane Ward for free. Having the Bone Spike Garb on basically gives you 1 extra wizard level in terms of how much damage reduction you have. So it makes it significantly harder for enemies to kill you. The retaliation damage is also very good. 2 extra damage reduction doesn't sound like much, but when it stacks with itself, each point becomes better than the previous point. So even small amounts of increasing damage reduction are hugely impactful on your survivability. The Adamantine Scale Mail is also very good for a similar reason and prevents critical hits, which are one of the few ways that enemies can breach your defenses, is if they get to double their damage by critically hitting. And in the end game, the Flame Enameled armor can give you damage resistance to fire and to cold using the Fire Shield bonus, and bonuses to saving throws, shore up the only defense that we're weak in, and bonuses to initiative are always welcome. Of course, the Helldusk armor is also 3 flat damage reduction, so it's even more damage reduction, and despite being heavy armor, does not require you to have heavy armor proficiency, so it gives you a tremendous amount of damage reduction, and is incredible for this character as well. There's also a couple really solid armors that you can take if you took heavy armor proficiency, which I talked about in the feats section. The first of these is, of course, the Armor of Persistence, which basically halves almost all incoming damage by giving you Blade Ward, and then reduces it further by 2, as well as giving you resistance to increase your saving throws. So again, an incredibly powerful defensive tool. But another armor that doesn't come up that often, but is incredible for this character, is the Rippling Force Mail, which whenever you take slashing, piercing, or bludgeoning damage. Now, this damage does have to actually hit your health, so it needs to go through your Arcane Ward to trigger this effect. You gain 2 turns of Force Conduit. Force Conduit is a buff that stacks over turns, very similar to Reverberation or Radiating Orb, but good instead of bad, and gives you 1 damage reduction against physical damage per turn remaining, up to a maximum of 7. If an enemy hits you while you have 5 or more turns remaining, it goes away and explodes, but that's even more retaliation damage. In addition to your Armor of Agathis and possibly your Fire Shields, you also get the Force Conduit damage, which means that this is both defensive and offensive because it lets you retaliate as well as absorb even more damage. So a cool item that you don't see used that often that's incredible for this character. The Flesh Melter Cloak is also worth mentioning. You can also just use a cloak like the Cloak of Protection to boost your saving throws. Saving throws are always good for this character, but we are going to be taking hits a lot and deliberately provoking attacks of opportunity from enemies a lot, so the Flesh Melter Cloak does a bunch of retaliation damage, and since we have so many effects that trigger whenever we do damage to enemies, a lot of those will trigger off of this 1d4 acid damage, so it ends up being worth a lot more than it looks like. Finally, bottles of water are incredible for us. We do a ton of lightning damage with all the lightning charges with our magic missiles, and a ton of cold damage thanks to Armor of Agathis doing cold retaliation damage, all of which gets doubled when an enemy is wet. So if you throw a bottle of water at someone, or have a familiar do it, or a mage hand do it, then you can double a lot of our damage output. Also, the Resonant Stone is great for this character because we do have access to Shadowblade, and we're going to be in melee a lot, especially in the early game, before you get Markoheshkir. There's not that much time in the game where you have the Resonant Stone and don't have Markoheshkir yet, but if you just want to do more melee damage for an encounter, the Resonant Stone increases your damage output a lot, and you can use Shadowblade to do tons and tons of melee damage with this character. Alright, my friends, I hope you've enjoyed this look at one of the most powerful characters in Baldur's Gate 3, the ultimate wizard with both offense and defense, higher than almost any other character in the game. And of course, I hope that it helps you in your honor mode runs. If you have enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a comment and hit like, it helps me out with the algorithm, so I really appreciate people taking the time to do that. And of course, you can subscribe to my channel for more Baldur's Gate 3 build guides and other strategy game analysis. Cheers, folks. I'll catch you next time.